Engineers love automation, and Wealthfront automates your investing. As a software engineer, there are certain processes that you want to execute no matter what, like integration tests during a build. You wouldn't execute integration tests manually. You would use a continuous integration tool like CodeShip or Jenkins to automate your integration tests. Wealthfront is a tool to automate investing. Just like a continuous integration tool runs your tests automatically, Wealthfront can reinvest your dividends automatically and perform tax loss harvesting automatically. To get your first $15,000 managed by Wealthfront for free, go to wealthfront.com/sedaily and get started with Wealthfront's layer of automation on top of your portfolio. Wealthfront.com/sedaily. Check it out. It would support Software Engineering Daily, and you will get $15,000 managed for free if you sign up. Automate your investing. Get back to the things that you can't automate, like writing code. Marty Haught is a director of RubyCentral, a nonprofit dedicated to the support and advocacy of the worldwide Ruby community. RubyCentral also hosts the RubyConf and RailsConf software conferences. Marty, welcome to Software Engineering Daily.
Great, thanks. It's nice to be here.
So you've been a software engineer for over 15 years. When did you start working with Ruby?
I started in 2005.
Okay.
It was the official time. Yes. And I got into that actually through JavaScript because I was doing more advanced UI work, and that was sort of the emergence of sort of the new JavaScript frameworks. And I found a prototype in Scriptaculous, and as I was diving into that, I saw all these references to Rails, and I'm like, what is Rails? And then I found that and was like, oh, this is interesting. Started playing with that. I'd been doing Java before that, Spring and things like that. And so I was like, this is very cool. I like this.
So I had a similar transformation from doing Spring Java development to Ruby on Rails. What were the things that stood out to you that distinguished Ruby on Rails from the Spring Java world?
Well, just less boilerplate, less hoops you had to jump through. I mean, this was also the time of EJBs, and it was pretty painful. Now, Spring was a move away from that, but it's still, I mean, you still had to do the XML sit-ups. There's so much configuration. And the thing that struck me about Ruby was as I started to write with it, I was struck by how often things just worked, or the thing that felt intuitive that I wanted to do was actually the right way to do it. And it worked right away, and that was very pleasing. And it was a little tough leaving the IDE because I had gotten used to the IDE, though as bloated as it was, doing so many things for me, going back to a lightweight text editor where I actually have to type everything out and a little code completion. But I mean, you're not doing huge refactorings in an IDE. It actually was nice because then I could just think more about the code I'm writing as opposed to how do I get the IDE to generate stuff for me.
So was there anything that hooked you to Ruby itself, or was it just the framework around it, Ruby on Rails?
Well, I liked Ruby a lot as a language itself too, and I hadn't done any functional programming before that point, and the use of lambdas and the dynamic elements of Ruby was fairly new. I mean, I'd done a little bit of Perl, but it was a very different experience with the very little Perl that I've worked with. And so from, Java, which was very strict, and, you had to, you couldn't change things as easily, but in Ruby you could. And I know Python, you certainly could do these things as well, but I hadn't really done much with Python at that point. And I was just very pleased with that. I really liked the notion of using blocks to do a lot of things that I wanted to do in Java. And all of a sudden, all these patterns that I learned to do things in Java were no longer necessary because they're just baked in to how you program in Ruby and other dynamic languages like that. But since that was my first experience with it, I was very taken with it. And of course, that led me to wanting to learn about this because it's so different and new from what I had been doing that I started seeking other people out that were doing Ruby or were interested in Ruby. And that's actually what led me to start doing the community thing because I started the Boulder Ruby group a user group, a monthly user group back in January 2006. So it was late 2005 that I started getting that going, and January is our first meeting.
Yeah, so let's talk some about that story. I saw a talk where you mentioned moving out of Kansas to Colorado and looking for this community because you knew nobody. Can you briefly describe that story?
Sure. So I had, my family and I had discussed, and we decided that we wanted to move to Colorado from Kansas. We really liked the area, and we were tired of Kansas and just wanting something different, something a little more exciting for our family. And also, I was looking for sort of the sweet spot of a great place for my kids to grow up, great, fun, recreational type activities, closer at hand, which we love the mountains, so that was perfect. But also I wanted a good tech community so that I'd have more options. It was at that point in time, it was getting okay at that point because that was like 2004. But just a few years from that earlier, the market was pretty rough, and I was still at that point, submitting resumes, for a job position where there might be 100 people applying, and just hoping I could get an interview. And I talked to some people, and they said, Marty, you should really network more because you can get around that. I'm like, oh, okay, maybe I should do that. So when we made the leap to move out to Colorado, we actually didn't have a job lined up or anything. And I decided I was going to move out here. And like a month or maybe a few weeks after I had made the intention that we're going to move out here, one of my friends back in Kansas approached me and said, Marty, we're starting this new company, and we're going to build this video service in Java. And we're going to be doing extreme programming. So you'll be one of 4 people on the team. I want you to be part of it. I'm like, well, that's great. But I'm moving to Colorado, so I can't stay, even as great as it sounds. And it was definitely the best job offer I'd ever been given. It was just given to me like, I know you, Marty, and I really want you to be on this team. And I was just flattered, but I'm like, gosh, we've committed to moving, so, it's too bad. And he's like, well, what if you stay a little bit longer and then you can move out to Colorado and work remote? And I'm like, ooh, that sounds really good because that accomplishes both. I get this cool job as well as I get to move to Colorado. And so that's how that started. But that got us out to Colorado, but it didn't change the fact that I didn't know anyone out here. And, I know that jobs come and go. Companies, especially startups, can go under at any point in time. I'd seen that previously, and I knew not to trust that. And so I still knew I had to do the networking piece. And so when I got out here, I started networking. And the first thing I did was go to Java user groups and the Boulder Jug specifically. And it was okay. It was pretty large, and I started talking to people. But it wasn't a great vibe. It was okay. But I was hoping for more connection with people, but people would just kind of stand around awkwardly, and there'd be presentations. And I met a few people, but it wasn't they weren't as friendly as I would have liked. But that's okay. And so as I started getting into Ruby, I started to look, hey, is there anyone doing Ruby here? And there was like one Linux users group that met at this cafe, this coffee shop in South Boulder that I went to. And I met another Rubyists there, and they had sort of like Rubyists would come here, but it wasn't actually a Ruby meeting at all. It was totally just about Linux, and that was cool. It was kind of like hacking around. But then I met Jeremy Heimgartner, and he and I started talking, and he's like, oh yeah, there's a few other Rubyists in the area. It's kind of like, oh cool. And so I started getting introductions to all these people, and Chad Fowler had also moved into the area not too recently. And so there was like 4 of us or 5 of us that said, hey, we should start something. And I said, I'll get it going. I'll get it organized. I just want to lean on you guys who know what you're actually doing in Ruby to speak at it and, bring other people in. And it just took off. It was definitely the right time. We had like 30 people at our first meeting. It was at a bar. It was a terrible place to meet. It was so loud, but it was really cool. And then like a company stepped forward and said, hey, Marty, we have this space that we would love to host the meeting, and we'd buy pizza and beer and stuff. And we're like, oh, that's great. Well, this makes my job a lot easier. So it just took off, and And I think within 2 years, we had such solid membership of just regulars coming and people volunteering to speak that it wasn't too hard, and it kind of took on a life of its own.
So it sounds like very early on, you realized that the culture that surrounded Rubyists was much different than that kind of culture that you referred to encountering at the Java users group.
Right. I don't think I knew that right away, though.
Well, I guess because your group was so small.
Right. And it could be that I'm a very friendly person, and so maybe because I started the meeting and I was being very friendly, that people just naturally started being friendly too. Like, oh yeah, we socialize here. Of course, we're at a bar. Or we're like, oh, this is our first meetup, and we're having this time where we're networking and chatting, and we're also excited because the people that came out to it, were really pumped to say, oh, cool, there's a thing talking about Ruby. And I think also just about that time, there was like a Rails studio that had, I think Pragmatic Studio perhaps put it on. That had just happened in Denver. So this also started another group in Denver that was for Rails called Derailed. And so anyway, and then a number of them came up to our meeting as well, which was pretty close to Boulder. We actually weren't in Boulder proper. We were in a suburb between Denver and Boulder. But in any event, there's a lot more excitement. So I didn't really know. I think until I went to RailsConf and RubyConf that year that I realized that it wasn't unique to our user group, that people were just a lot nicer, a lot more open. And it also turned out that RubyConf that year was in Denver. So it made it really easy for me to go to that. It wasn't so much of a stretch. And I was just shocked by, oh, wow, it's like, I kind of like the feel of my user group, only it's got like 400 people in it. So I was like, this is great. This is really cool. So yeah, I think at that point I realized there's something here that was different, and I really liked it.
So what is it? What is it that leads to these Ruby communities, these Ruby user groups having a different ethos than the Java user groups?
Well, that's an excellent question, and I have a few guesses as to why. There's a phrase that we have in the Ruby community called MINASWAN, which means Mats is nice, and so we are nice. And Mats is the creator of Ruby. And Mats is a very nice individual. And I think the idea behind this phrase is that because he created Ruby for a certain purpose, to have joy of programming, to make it easier on programmers, and to make a better language that he wanted to work with and have others use, sort of just permeated the people that were drawn to it, especially once it came over to the English-speaking world in 2000, 2001. That happened. Also, I think because Dave Thomas, who is sort of credited with bringing it over to the English-speaking world, also was, that's a pragmatic programmer. So he had this idea of, giving back and being very generous and nice and all that. And I think the people that are drawn to it were also more progressive sort of programmers. So these aren't your rank and file, we're just 9 to 5 kind of programmers that, there's nothing wrong with that, but they're fine settling for, this is just what I'm doing, this is my job, I'm not interested in, stretching or learning or, meeting other people, this is just a job. Whereas I think the initial people that are drawn to it felt it was so different, and they were already on this path of, self-learning and getting better. And I know Chad Fowler was part of that. And Chad also, I think, embodies a lot of that himself, where he's giving back, he's trying to help other people get better. And so I think because that had been established in the community early on, and then the user groups also kind of did that, Seattle RB and others, they were really beating the drum of that sort of vibe, that it just spread, and people knew, almost like when you came into the community, you saw how people were behaving. You're like, oh, good, I can be this way here. And I think it just permeates and just keeps going on from there. And
whereas Java maybe feels like, as opposed to Matt's control or personifying Ruby, there's not really a personification of Java. It's just kind of like big hulking corporate entities that you think of when you think of Java programming. Yeah,
I think so. You have factions, groups that are doing cool things that don't have that vibe, but you also have large sort of standards bodies, creating things, and it's very corporate or very heavy. And I mean, I think that should just sort of ripples out into all aspects of the language and its community and its frameworks and all that. And the other thing is that that Ruby is very, very open source, right? I don't know of any Ruby that's not open source that anyone even uses. So I think because that also plays into it, where, hey, we can give back by contributing to this library, or we could write our own library and share it with others, and other people can help us, and then it becomes maybe the de facto standard in the community. And so there's a more giving sense with others, because it's not something that's controlled by a corporate entity or isn't heavy because there's some standards body that's trying to control things. And not saying that those things are bad at all. It's just that wasn't a thing, because back then people were like, Ruby's a toy, like this is just kind of neat. But it turns out that there are a lot of properties about Ruby and its community that made creating great libraries and frameworks could emerge from it very fast, very like, hey, let's change how we do this. Like Rails. I mean, you think about that. David's idea there is like he saw these ways of building web apps that were smarter than what everyone else was doing. And he borrowed ideas from everywhere, but he could do that. He could change it, and he could create it in Ruby, and it would move fast, and people were very drawn to that. Anyway, I think these all kind of play into the factor into how the community was more open and friendly and giving back. And I think that's...
So let's talk about how your role within the community has developed. Could you talk about RubyCentral and how RubyCentral got started and what the goal of it is?
Right. So the early history, which I wasn't around for, but what I've heard from others, was that it started pretty early on after RubyConf. I don't think it was started before the first RubyConf, which was 2001. But it was started pretty early on as just an organization to manage the conference. And the conference was very small. I think the first year was like 30 some odd people. So it wasn't a very large thing. But they realized they needed some sort of structure entity that actually would, organize the conference. And the original members, I think Dave might have been an original member, but the three members that were basically started and ran it for the longest time. That would be David Black, Chad Fowler, and Rich Kilmer. And the three of them ran it for a long, long time. And I think, I'm trying to remember what year it was, maybe 2009 or 10, around there. They had been doing it for 8 years at that point.
Okay.
They started to transition it to some others in the community to start running that. Evan Phoenix, Ben Schofield came on, and then I came on as the third director after that, basically David's replacement. But that's sort of that early history. The purpose of the organization is a nonprofit, is a 501c3 nonprofit organization, and its job is to promote community and basically run the two conferences. Originally it was just RubyConf, but eventually we created RailsConf and ran that. And
so I'd like to get an idea of why conferences are so important. Like I listened to a quote that you said. You said you attended your first developer conference 8 years after you started writing code, and you really made a point to lament this. You said, you described this as having waited far too long to attend a conference. How early in their careers should people attend conferences, and what is the value that you get out of attending a conference?
Well, I think they should do it right away. Even if they're not sure they want to become a programmer, I think it's worth doing. Now, the caveat I would say at that is pick a local conference that isn't going to cost you a ton of money. I wouldn't suggest you buy a plane ticket and fly to some city across the country and pay $400 or something for a ticket if you're not really sure. But the reason why I think it's beneficial to developers to experience this, whether you're brand new or whether you've been programming for 5, 10, whatever years, is that it opens your mind to working collaboratively and seeing things differently. I mean, of course, there's the talks, and now in this day and age, you can a lot of talks are recorded and you can just watch them for free, and that's great. But that's only one aspect. There's that aspect, right? So you can learn quite a bit from attending the talks. But of course, after the talk, you should be talking to people if you're interested in this topic. So like you might go up front to the room and you might ask some questions of the speaker, and there's usually there is a group of people that do this. And there are fascinating conversations happening up there because maybe there are questions that someone didn't want to ask generally, while the session was going on, or at the very end when they ask for questions, maybe it's something they wish want to have more personal conversation with. But these happen. And so that's really pretty cool. So if there's, I don't know, some technique or library or thing that you're interested in that there's a talk on, you can go and have that conversation. And that's very cool.
How much knowledge do you get at a conference that transfers back to the work that you're doing on a day-to-day basis? Or is the value of a conference more to just meet people and network and gain disparate ideas that may help you further on in your job?
Well, that's an excellent question. I think it varies. So I think that meeting people is really important, and it's uncomfortable for some that are more introverted, but it's still good to do. And the thing is that you can pick up new ideas or new ways of working or have interesting conversations where you talk about a problem that you've sort of been tackling at work. And you'd be surprised because here you are with, if it's, like RubyConf, you're 800 or so people that are very like-minded. And you may not know them, but you actually have a lot already in common with these other people. And you can have those conversations. And the thing is, because of, at least with developer-centric conferences, which is what RubyConf and RailsConf are, and there are many others like this, that you're all here to learn about being a better developer or how to use Ruby better. And because of that, people are really happy to chat and offer advice or, kind of lament about some problem that we have that all the time too, and we're still trying to figure it out. But it is, every time I've gone to a conference, pretty much every time, there's always been some new idea or some new way of working that I have been exposed to, whether it was watching a session that I wanted to see or whether it was in the hallway track, which is that in-between time between sessions where you're talking with people, hanging out at the snack table or whatever, or whatnot. And these ideas, they happen as long as you're open to talking to other people and listening. And sometimes you can just eavesdrop. And, you can go to the end of the session where the speaker is talking with a bunch of other people, and you can just hang out and listen, and you'll get ideas, and you'll be like, wow. Or it might be something as straightforward as there's a talk on this new like GraphQL or something that's new you haven't heard about. And, you read the abstract and you're like, that sounds like that might be useful to my organization or to my project. Mm-hmm. And you go to it and it's confirmed. And you're like, wow, this is great. I'm glad that I now got exposed to it. And you wouldn't necessarily know to go and look for this. I mean, would you Google that? Probably not. But because you heard people talking about it or because you're looking through the program, you read the abstract, and you're like, oh, this looks interesting. I got to do something this hour or whatever. Oh, this talk looks great, so I'll go to this talk. That happens. And I think until you've experienced that, you're missing out, basically. And I think it's worth every developer to experience that at least once. You might decide that you didn't plug in, you didn't get the sort of benefit that you thought you would get. But until you try, you don't know. And that's a thing where I look at 8 years where I was just doing the Java thing and just following along. And I learned stuff, but boy, once I started going to conferences, that just got accelerated big time. Like I learned so much. I got to meet interesting people and I was inspired by them, or I'm like, gosh, I really like how that person or how she was. Or
so when you say that got accelerated, do you mean you got exposed to new ideas and you started pursuing those ideas of your own volition, or was there just some, like breakthroughs that you didn't get exposed to day to day in your kind of Java world? Or
yeah, I think all of that really. And sometimes there's just a general level of like excitement, and my passions have been renewed, and I'm ready to, this thing I've been putting off, I'm going to go ahead and jump on it and knock it out. Or there's also like oh no, I'm going to the conference in a few weeks. I promised some people that we had talked about this one thing, so I better do the work I said I would do and kept putting off so that it's done. And then I show up and then we can have that conversation. I can show off this new thing I'm doing or this new library or whatever. And I think that all those things are true and they do happen. And certainly I noticed after going to those conferences, that it was like 2-4 times faster, and how quickly I was absorbing things and how excited I was about stuff. And it just all, once you get that higher level energy, it's going to feed on itself and it's going to keep going.
I think another thing that's really useful for developers, and this is something that has helped me from doing the podcast, is like when you work with the same technologies every day, you develop, in my experience at least, you develop kind of a paranoia of locking horns with another new technology. And if you make a practice of bombarding yourself with new technologies on a regular basis, whether it's through conferences or just like reading about random stuff online, it really helps break down that fear of jumping on a new technology. And the thing is, like, being positioned to jump on new technologies is so important as a software engineer. Like if you see an opportunity for a new technology and you say that is something that I need to learn, you should be able to jump on it quickly and without fear. And I think like attending these conferences or getting exposed to new types of technologies in some other fashion is just like absolutely necessary to break down that comfort zone problem.
I would agree with that. Seriously, like think back 5 years even, and what that we were doing 5 years ago, do you still do today? Exactly. And, like there are certainly things that you do. And, certainly like if you're looking at Ruby, then yeah, you still program Ruby in probably the same way, but there's a lot of different parts of the ecosystem that have changed. They're constantly changing. So, if I hadn't learned anything in the last 15 years, boy, that would have really sucked if I was programming servlets, as I was back in the late 90s, really. So there's just so many improvements and like, hey, let's try it this way. Let's use this approach in how we talk to servers or how we build code on a client or whatever it might be. And if you're not open to that, you're going to be left behind. Yeah. And the thing is, if you're letting the fear of trying something new stop you, then, well, that's something you need to overcome, because it's only going to hurt you more if you don't just do it. And I think if you have a deliberate practice of like new programming language every year, or just something new every year, then even if you like give yourself the permission to say, I am not going to try and make anything practical of this. I'm going to learn Elm just to learn Elm because I think it's really cool, or whatever. Not like I have to have a valid business case use for this thing that is, makes it worth my time to learn it. But no, like just learn it. Like go and learn Elixir and learn how you can do pattern matching in that or whatever it might be, because whether or not you actually use it in a production app in the next 6 months doesn't really matter. Being exposed to it in maybe a different way of programming or a different way of thinking is worth the cost of admission.
Yeah. Another thing that kind of reminds me, like another thing I felt when I moved from the Java world and started building some Rails apps was this sense that, as a Java developer, in my experience at least, you tend to pigeonhole yourself as a quote back-end developer, and the truth of that is that it's kind of a tragedy, because like when you pigeonhole yourself that way, you decisively choose not to engage with whatever you've defined the front end as. And what I like about Rails is it kind of like necessitates being whatever full stack means. And it's like, I think that's actually the way to learn to program. Like I don't think you can just be this back end person that's like totally relegated and doesn't understand the nature of the front end, especially because like the nature of the front end and what the back end is and the middle end and whatever these things, they're like really changing quickly. And even the front end is like becoming so much more complex and back end looking like. I mean, it's like these like node middleware type of stuff. So yeah, that's something I really valued about my Ruby experience, my Rails experience, in contrast with my backend Java experience. I don't know if that resonates with you as well.
Yeah, I think so. The nice thing about Rails compared to when I was doing Java stuff was that it was so easy to build something full stack. If you were to take a slice of your application from, the moment a client interacts on a web or whatever down to interacting with the database or some backend service, that you can quickly write that slice so fast, and you can touch all the parts, and you can make it more complex on any side, any aspect of the application, whether it's middleware, whether it's back-end processing or something like that, report type stuff, or whether it's very front-end heavy, maybe it's very dynamic UI, where you're, like like an Ember or something like that, or React or something like that. You can totally do all that, but it's so easy to go from the beginning, the front end, all the way to the back end that you have no excuse. Whereas in Java, it was, there was so much you had to do that it's like, gosh, to do a slice would be painful, where it's so easy to say, okay, I'm just going to be doing, servlets, or I'm just going to be, interfacing with this, the ORM or something like that. And, I'll let some other group handle that component or something like that. And usually also those projects were a lot bigger. So your teams got chopped up and you didn't get to work on a small app where you kind of did everything, which is totally what, Rails allowed you to do. So I think that's definitely true.
Engineers are always looking to simplify. To simplify testing and deployment, engineers turn to CodeShip. CodeShip is continuous integration and delivery as a service. With CodeShip, your tests are executed against your code automatically whenever you push to GitHub or Bitbucket. On Software Engineering Daily, we've done several shows about DevOps, and continuous deployment is key to DevOps. It's a great way to break down the wall of confusion between development and operations. Managing your own testing infrastructure is painful. That's why you want a service like CodeShip to do it for you. If you have a huge number of tests, you can use CodeShip's Parallel CI to run all your tests in parallel. CodeShip will spin up containers on their own infrastructure to run your tests in parallel. If the code passes your tests, CodeShip will deploy it automatically to your users. Companies like Product Hunt are already using CodeShip to speed up and simplify development. To sign up for free and start shipping today, go to codeship.com. Or to try out CodeShip's new Docker platform, go to codeship.com/Docker. Yeah, so let's talk some more about the nature of conferences, and particularly how the nature of conferences reflects and enables the community of particular programming areas. So like Ruby, for example, you've said that the world needs more programmers. And as a reflection of this, the Ruby community also needs more programmers. So how can a community help this problem? How can a community learn how to grow itself? And also, I guess, how can the programmer community at large encourage a larger influx of programmers?
Well, I think the first thing that comes to mind is we need to make the community very welcoming, make our conferences, our events very welcoming, and certainly at RubyCentral we've definitely done that. I think we've seen, it's unscientific, but with a show of hands at our conferences, we always ask in the very, very beginning, show of hands, who is at RubyConf or RailsConf for the first time? And lately it's been pretty much half the audience, and it just floors me, and it's not the way it used to be. So we're seeing quite an influx of I wouldn't say new programmers, because they could be, people that have been programming a while, but they finally show up to a conference. And I think that's great, because then that's just showing you new people are coming in. We are seeing a lot of new programmers coming in. Of course, you've talked about the rise of the bootcamps, and they're just everywhere. And there are people that are wanting to get into this. And I think, back to my original comment that we need more programmers, the thing is there's just so much to do. Mm-hmm. There's so many projects that are starting, and so many businesses that are finally coming around to, I need to have this sort of solution, or there's a better way to do something that has been done traditionally in some other way that now software can disrupt or can just change how that's done. And there's just so much demand. And the thing is, of course, most of the demand is we want seniors or we want people who are experienced. And I understand why they want that, but that doesn't help somebody who's getting in. And so I think there's a couple things that we can do that will make it all a bit easier. So the first part I mentioned is being welcoming. And, certainly we have policies that are that way, but also we create content and we use language that makes it very clear that, hey, if you're brand new to Ruby, great, come on down. We've got, sessions that are meant for you. It won't be scary. We have this thing called the Opportunity Scholarship that I started at Rocky Mountain Ruby, my own conference that I ran for a number of years in Boulder, that was about getting people an opportunity to come to the conference in a guided sense. So they get a guide and they get to, so it's not as scary, because it can be scary to show up, you don't know anybody, and there's 200, 300, or at RailsConf or RubyConf, 900, 1,500 people that are there, and you're like, oh, wow, I don't know. I can't do this. I don't know what to do. There's a sea of people, and I totally don't want to talk to any of them. I'm so nervous. So the whole idea of this guide thing is that, hey, look, here you've met a friend, a guide that's going to be helping you go around the conference, and totally makes it it's acceptable to ask dumb questions or ask any sort of questions, get recommendations on what you should do if it's like a multi-track conference where you should go, and maybe get introductions to other people that will really help you. And so that was my original idea. And all these things are about making the conference experience better for someone who's new. So it's not an insider's club or anything like that. It's very welcoming, but also that they make sure they have a really good experience while they're there, so that the conference is really well run, and it's they feel safe and included and welcomed as they come to the conference, and all that kind of plays a part to, after they're done with the conference, they'll be like, yeah, this is great. I love this conference, and I feel like I'm in the right place to be a programmer, and I'm going to feel encouraged to get better and become a better programmer. And eventually they'll be the seniors, right, that will be, bringing in new people.
So I also feel like there's a certain process to founding a community and building a community. So like Software Engineering Daily, for example, this podcast, we're trying to build a larger community. We're trying to fill this gap of resources that help educate and inform developers on technical software topics. And it's been a hurdle to find our way into the community and get people to engage with us and communicate closely. So, do you have any best practices? And I'm sure this would also appeal to people who are thinking of starting meetups somewhere, like a JavaScript meetup in Uzbekistan or something. How do you become more embedded within existing communities, and how do you find your niche and build a community?
Well, let's see. So I guess the first thing is generally people will they'll come out for something if there's something to come out for. So when you're starting a meetup or when you're creating content that you want people to kind of check out, the first thing is make sure there's something for them to go to. And so if you're starting a meetup, you make sure you have some presentations that they're interesting to people that you would reach out to. And then of course, there's just some logistics aspects of running a meetup so that, it doesn't suck, essentially. They know, they're not confused. They know how to get there. Maybe there's food. It doesn't have to be food. But, if there's food, make that be known. Communicate what the format is. So if it's going to be more of a hacking kind of experience, that's great. But make sure it's communicated and create your space. So, where are you meeting? Is it good for the kind of format of the meeting that you're going to do? And I think a lot of that, when you think about what you want to try and create, have you experienced that yourselves? Do you know anybody else who's doing a meetup like that? Or have you even attended meetups? Hopefully you have, so you have a sense of, hey, I went to this one meetup and I liked these things. I didn't like those things. But a lot of it comes down to, okay, what are you trying to accomplish? What's the format you want? Try to do a little bit of research so you know what you should be doing for that format and then execute on it. But then the other piece is that you have to do outreach. And so And it's pretty easy for us to talk in our own circles, but how do you get outside of the circles that you already have? And there are different strategies for that, but a lot of times it's just going out and networking. Where are the developers? Maybe they're, go to maybe your local college or go to your boot camp. So the boot camps are really easy, of course, but maybe go to other meetups and start talking about what you're doing. The other thing is, of course, using social media is great to spread the word as well. Maybe go to businesses in the community that have programmers that either are working in that language or might be open to that sort of thing. And then again, as you do this outreach, as long as there's something for them to go to and you communicate it and you make it clear that there's something happening and it's, you welcome them, you want them to come to it, then it'll start happening. And of course, as you start to have these meetups, and you want to start small. I mean, don't expect that you're going to get 60 or 100 people to show up right away. But as you get people to come out, have them spread the word too. And if it's a good experience, word of mouth is just going to work on that. So I think I don't know about the podcast piece because I haven't had experience trying to do that piece. But I think from a meetup standpoint, that works. I certainly know from like RubyConf and RailsConf standpoint, we don't really do any marketing. I mean, we just create information, put it on our website, we use social media, and we just let the community at large spread the word. And
yeah, well, I mean, one advantage is that programmers are like pretty social media savvy, and they'll aggressively share stuff. And so yeah, I mean, the thing with the podcast, like it's actually been really, really enjoyable to feel like I am like helping to build a community. Like we have a Slack channel. And also, if anybody's listening, I encourage them to go to softwareengineeringdaily.com and join the Slack channel. We have some great conversations on there. It's really enjoyable. And I think the same would probably be true for anybody out there who's thinking about starting a meetup, or some other type of in-person event. I think it's just really rewarding and probably like really fun, and there's like no downside risk. So anyway, I encourage people to try that. So let's talk about some more technical stuff.
Okay.
With JavaScript is kind of emerging as the leading language. It's kind of taking over in terms of sheer volume. I mean, if you look at GitHub repositories, I think JavaScript kind of dominates. So I'm curious what you think how you think this impacts Ruby on Rails. Like, are people sort of saying, I need to get off of, people who have been programming in Ruby on Rails for a long time, are they saying, I need to move off of Ruby on Rails because it's falling by the wayside? I need to move to full stack JavaScript. What do you think about this?
That's a good question. So certainly the Ruby on Rails as being the cool kid around is definitely gone. That's definitely passed. We've seen a shift.
But it's not Java yet. It's not Spring.
Java. And I don't honestly think it'll become Java because the reasons that made Ruby and Ruby on Rails so popular to begin with, the fad thing has passed for sure, but the productivity, the pleasure of working in it, that's
and to be clear, I think like spinning up a Rails application is still much easier than like spinning up the equivalent in Express or whatever you use.
Right. And I think that certainly JavaScript, there's a reason why it's very popular. The fact that it's really the only show in town on the browser and will be for quite some time. I mean, you have the different languages that transpile into JavaScript. So, like ClojureScript or Elm or whatnot. And that's great. I mean, that's great to see that you have different options. And certainly with ES6 coming out that, we now can write JavaScript in not such painful ways. Cause, I certainly remember JavaScript back, in the 90s and the early aughts where it was pretty rough. I mean, it was brutal. And you kind of wanted to do very little in JavaScript. It's gotten so much better. And certainly there's a lot of new things, new ways of working that are constantly coming out. And certainly JavaScript is leading the way that way. And I think it's all good. The Rails and Ruby there's still a ton of people using it. I don't think that aspect is decreasing. I think there's a lot more people writing code out there, so it's certainly increasing. And you do have a lot of people that do JavaScript with their Ruby, right? I mean, you've got a ton of front ends that you can choose from, whether it's just vanilla JavaScript, as it were, or jQuery or whatnot, or whether you go into something like Angular or React or, Ember or something like that. There's still lots of groups that are, have those front ends with a Rails backend, and you have other people moving on to other things, like they're now working in Clojure, or they're working in Elixir, and then certainly working in Node. And it makes a lot of sense if you're only going to get good at one language, get good at JavaScript and do Node in the backend, and you have your front end with JavaScript. And I think it's fine. I think for most of us that have been programming longer, it's like, well, why are you limiting yourself to one language? Like, wouldn't you want to choose the right tool for your project based on the context of things? And I think that's still important. And so there's still a lot of people that start their projects with Rails because it still fits pretty well. That it's not the right tool for every single thing, for sure. And so once you understand why you would grab Node, or whether you grab Clojure or Elixir or whatever it might be that you want to grab, you know to do that, you know why. And a lot of times it's based on, okay, what's your team? What do they want to work in? What's the, if you're handing this off like from a consultancy to, a company, what's their team like? What can they handle? And so I think all that's, that all plays into the fact I wouldn't get too worried about, new language being popular. I think it's a healthy thing that you see, is there something that's being done in a new way over there that we should incorporate? And that's the neat thing about Rails. And I mean, Ruby is pretty good as a language, although they're constantly adding little things, and Rails as well. So, Rails keeps adapting and saying, here's this new way of working with our apps. So it's kind of keeping up, but it's not changing everything. So there's certain things that you would just go with a different framework entirely than Rails because, it doesn't do its strength isn't what this new approach might be.
Yeah, and so another angle of this conversation is the coding bootcamp angle. Like, we did all these shows about coding bootcamps, as you mentioned, and I feel like, maybe 2/3 of them do all JavaScript, and then 1/3 of them do Rails. I'm not sure if that's an accurate proportion at all, just back of the envelope maybe, but for new developers, like, what are the trade-offs between these two?
Well, I think
like a new developer entering a coding bootcamp, should he pursue or she pursue a Rails bootcamp or a JavaScript bootcamp?
That's an excellent question. I think that that Rails and Ruby is a little easier and friendlier to learn and a little more pleasant to work with. Ecosystem's a little more mature, but the thing is, you can't avoid JavaScript. So I could see that if you're only going to learn one language, then you're probably best off doing JavaScript initially. I think it's good, though, for newer developers to learn two. I mean, get good at one first so that you understand. And I would lean towards Ruby still, because I think there's things that it's still worth doing that. Even if you end up writing more Node or whatnot, I think there's still, like, the learning to program aspect is good in Ruby, and it's a more pleasant experience starting off. I think JavaScript will get there. JavaScript's a lot, I won't say younger, but if you think about sort of how JavaScript is now, that way of being is fairly young compared to other language ecosystems. And they'll get there, and they're making it better. I do know that, and I don't do much Node, so I can't speak a ton about that. But I do know that when I have done some of that, and when I have worked with NPM and stuff, I've been a little disappointed by how often things break. And it's like I'm fighting the tool set, and I'm fighting all the dependencies and the libraries more often than I would in the Ruby world or in other language ecosystems. And I think that's okay. I think after a while you're like, really? I guess my morning is shot because I need to troubleshoot this one thing and fix it that just has to do with my build tool. and has nothing to do with actual my application. It's now something upgraded and something broke, and now I'm chasing down what's the problem. I think that's actually a good experience to have. I mean, as a developer, you're gonna face that at some point. So I don't think hiding from it is bad. But then if you have that experience too often as a new programmer, maybe that's a little disheartening. I don't know. It's I'm not sure. But I think it's important that, you're going to have to face that anyway. So that's where I might lean towards the stability of Rails as kind of getting your feet wet and getting good at it. And then, and then moving more into JavaScript. And then you can decide, now you have two options, right? As you look for jobs or as you work on projects, you're comfortable in both. That's the best of both worlds. And then you can even move into a third language if you find a shop that wants to work in Clojure or Elixir or some other, maybe Java or .NET or, or something like that. You might go and you'll have all those experiences already.
Yeah. So, to begin to close off, I want to talk a little bit about some of your biographical background. You used to be a musician and an audio engineer. So, I mean, I'm curious, like, what your experience was like. I write a lot of electronic music, so I'm familiar with like digital audio workstations and kind of that workflow and stuff. So, how did you pivot to software engineering, and did you find the movement to software engineering to be a natural transformation from your work as a musician and audio engineer?
Yeah, I think so. So and earlier on, I actually was in the Army. So right after high school, I never went to college. That's something
fascinating
to put out there. So I'm not. I picked up programming and all the computer stuff by myself on my own. Self-taught. So I want to put that out there. So I was going to be an aeronautical engineer out of high school. I actually had won a scholarship, a full ride to Wichita State University, and was going to do that. I grew up in Kansas, and so that was a local state school that was fairly good at aeronautical engineering, and I was going to do that. So I had the engineering mind already. So I do want to put that out there that I felt comfortable with that. And I had been using computers in various sorts as a kid. A lot of Amiga, I will say, because we loved those Amiga games back in the 80s, and it was great. So I went in the Army, and so that was a very interesting experience. And I got out because I just didn't feel it was the right fit for me. I enjoyed my time in and serving my country and all that, but I wanted to pursue being a musician, which I had been a musician in high school, but not in bands and not going after it. But I decided to do that. I played a little bit in the Army with some Army buddies, and then I went to music school, and I went ahead and got it's a contemporary music school, so it wasn't a college degree kind of thing. It's accredited now, but it wasn't back then. And I learned to be a professional musician, and I played in some bands, and I had a lot of fun with that. I discovered though that it's pretty tough to make money as a musician. I did have some paying gigs where I'd come on and I was a bass player. I'd come on and they would need me to read some charts and whatever and kind of fill in for somebody who's sick. And I would earn maybe $75 for the night or something like that. And it was decent money that way. I was certainly, it was better than, my other alternatives that I was aware of at that point. And in the bands that I was in that we had our own music, it was always tricky because we were investing everything into the band. So the band, whenever we made money for gigs, very little, if any, would ever come out to us to pay our own stuff. So it was always back into the band, paying for the next record we were going to record. And it was a lot of fun. I found that musicians generally were pretty flaky and lacked discipline. And it was, I'm like, dude,
that is also my experience. That is absolutely my experience.
This is a thing. This is really a thing. I mean, not all of them, but there's enough. And like, dude, this is your band. You called for this practice. How can you not even show up?
Yeah.
Like, it just floored me. And I also, during this time, because I actually did need to make money and pay my bills, I worked at this music school that I graduated from. And audio engineering, real quick as an aside, I really liked it. I loved working in the studio, and I found it was very satisfying to sort of my problem-solving engineering mindset. Whereas being a musician, I loved it, but there's like maybe 2/3 or 3/4 of myself that was not truly engaged there. And so I liked having that aspect. So, but the thing with audio engineering is that your jobs initially are pretty, you learn, you're like coffee boy and cable wrapper. You don't even get to set the mics, no, but you can run the cables and you can kind of set things up. But of course, you don't do mic placement. And maybe you'll get to start working on setting some gates and compression and whatnot.
Yeah.
But, you won't be touching the board. That's for like first or second engineer to do that. And eventually you can work your way up, but that might be 2 or 3 years before you would even be given any kind of real responsibility. The other alternative, of course, is that you go freelance and like try to recruit brands to record them, and then you go in the studio with them and be their engineer. But that, that's like, going freelance and building your own business. So it's a little scary that way. So that's a little aside. So neither of those opportunities were very good from a financial situation initially, and that's okay. So during this time I was working at the school, and I did a number of things. I worked in the resource lab, and one of the things we had to do was take care of all the computers. And I learned very quickly that I knew more about computers than anybody at the school. And so I started doing all their IT work and such. And then, of course, it led to some website work. And so I started doing website stuff for them. And I just pick it up like, oh, well, when you do a website, let's figure out how to do this. And I go and grab a book on HTML or whatever. And I'd read it like, well, this makes sense. Okay, this is markup. Okay, I just figured it out. And from there, I left because I don't remember exactly what happened, but I guess I'd heard that IT professionals were paid like $12 an hour or something like that. And I was being paid like minimum wage. And I'm like, oh, I'd be paid more. And I'm like, this is great. This is like 95 or so. So 96. And so then I then decided they weren't interested in paying me more. Like, oh, why should we pay you more? You're just working on computers. Like, what? But my industry's paid more, and they weren't interested in that. So then I went and started being like kind of like a network admin, sort of level 1 tech support kind of person, and just helped plug computers and get them working on network and stuff like that. And then I also continued to work with web stuff. And then I got my first gig in 97 at Digital River, where I was doing a mixture of HTML and working with their e-commerce platform, basically as data entry and helping people to, create their custom storefronts in Digital River, because it was an e-commerce outfit pretty early on. And then from there, I was fascinated by programming, so I started reading more about it. And I also was really good at troubleshooting and identifying their problems. I was really good at hunting down bugs, basically being QA. I was QA in a way. And I was really good. And I'd go back to their engineers and I would say, hey, I noticed this thing. I noticed this behavior. And it looks like only when I do this that it happens. And they're like, oh, that's right. Well, and I'd help them kind of troubleshoot it. And so I started just seeing the code they were working with. And then I thought that was very cool. I'm like, this is really cool stuff. So I just tried to pick up more and more of it. And eventually they let me switch over to client applications where I was actually doing more real programming. And so from there, I just kept learning a new technology and getting good at it, asking questions, talking to lots of other engineers, and pretty much just stepping stones from there until I got to where at some point I realized, actually I can pretty much do everything on a project. And I'm not scared of that. Like maybe early on, there's this fear of like, hey, computer science. Oh, wow, you have to go to school for that.
Right.
It's really hard. It's really difficult. And you certainly, if you don't go to college, there's no way you could do it. I had that mentality. But then as I was like, looking at stuff like, no, I mean, yeah, you didn't have the resources back then that you have now. Like you couldn't Google things. Google didn't even exist. But you could still kind of just figure stuff out and like grab a book on some language and start to, solve it yourself. And then you realize, wow, actually it is hard. I don't want to say it's not hard, but it's not all that is as hard as you might have thought. And so I got to this point where I wasn't afraid anymore. I'm like, I'm going to figure this out. And I might get my butt kicked by not being able to solve a problem, but I'm certainly going to give it a shot. And more often than not, I found that I could figure out a solution, or at least find somebody who could help me solve it. And I would learn, oh, okay, I see. Okay, I see how that thing happened, or whatever it was.
Yeah. Well, that's great. That's a really interesting history, winding history to programming.
Right.
Well, awesome. Well, Marty Haught, thanks for coming on to Software Engineering Daily. It's been really interesting talking to you about Ruby and communities. And
yeah, thanks for having me, Jeff. It's been fun.